So with The Walking Dead coming back on tonight, I figured I'd try my hand at some Walking Dead comics. I've tried this a couple times before, but it really kind of received a mixed reception. But I think that now is probably the best time to delve into Walking Dead content due to the fact that it's one of the most searched terms in Google right now. And if there's any one thing that people want to know, it's who was it that Negan killed in The Walking Dead? And so the answer to this question actually takes place or comes to us in a story called Something to Fear. Now, there are some differences between the comic books and the TV show. And so instead of like prefacing all this with, at the beginning of the video, we're actually gonna take it as we go through things. But what this story does, or what the story arc does rather, is it initially opens up with basically church. And this is designed by Robert Kirkman to tell us that within the Alexandria safe zone, within this area, simply called Alexandria, that life goes on as normal. Now, the reason why is because prior to this story arc, there was an event called A Larger World. And what A Larger World did is it gave us a few things. One, the leader of Alexandria was not a woman like we saw in the TV show. Instead, it was a man. But when Alexandria basically fell, and when Rick Grimes and his forces were able to clear out, all the zombies that invaded Alexandria and kind of go back to trying to live a normal life as well as rebuilding it, the group was met by the arrival of a man named Paul Monroe, also known as Jesus. And what he did is he introduced them to a place called the Hilltop Colony, a location that Rick Grimes and his crew were previously unaware of. Now, the issue with this, or I guess in the events leading up to this particular story, Something to Fear, there were some circumstances that went on. Basically, one of a member of a group called the Saviors had been sent to the Hilltop Colony for the purpose of sending a message, and in the midst of sending this message, he attacked a guy named Gregory, who was the leader of the Hilltop Colony, and killed him. Now, while Rick Grimes in turn killed the attacker, and I think his name was Ethan, when everybody around the Hilltop Colony was surprised, Paul Monroe spoke up and basically told Rick Grimes that the way the situation worked is that there is a group called the Saviors. And the Saviors, if I remember correctly, are about 200 strong, and they are cold-blooded and they are ruthless. But an agreement was struck between the Hilltop Colony and the Saviors that as long as the Hilltop Colony gave up supplies at the demand of the Saviors, that the Saviors themselves would protect the Hilltop Colony from bandits, from zombie threats, basically keep the Hilltop Colony protected. So it was very much a Eloy and Morlock kind of situation, if you guys are familiar with the Time Machine from H.G. Wells. But because of the fact that this was a situation that Rick Grimes wasn't initially in agreement with, and because of the fact that he had killed a member of the Saviors as a group view themselves as a single entity, meaning that if one person harms one of them, then that person needs to be dealt with. It's not a situation where the Saviors simply say, well, one guy down, it doesn't really matter. They will go after who that person is. And that's what this does. But it also gives us a few things in terms of status quo. For example, at this point in the comic books, Rosita is spending time with Eugene. Now, the two of them are not actually dating, but Rosita is not in a relationship with Abraham any longer. And so while Eugene kind of uses this to mess with Abraham a little bit, at the very least, it just shows us that there's trouble in paradise with regards to the team of Rosita, Eugene, and Abraham. And so again, this is just kind of Robert Kirkman giving us information, showing us how things go, but we also pick up with Rick Grimes and with Andrea. Now, something I want to point out here is that unlike the TV show where Rick Grimes and Michonne are in a relationship, in the comic books, Rick Grimes and Andrea are in a relationship. This is also in stark contrast to the TV show in that we saw Andrea die, and there weren't that many people who were sad to see her go. I certainly was not sad to watch her die. But in the TV show, the character of Sasha is basically Andrea. So in the comics, as we're going through this, imagine the personality of Sasha from the TV show with the physical body of Andrea, and that's who Andrea is here in the comics. She's a prodigious shooter. She's one of the strongest members of the team. She's actually like the second in command to Rick Grimes. And of course, the two of them are also lovers. But on their journey, they're met by the arrival of Dwight, basically. They're met by the arrival of the forces of Negan. Now, when they initially show up, this is one of the first times that Rick Grimes really knows who Negan is, or at least seems to understand who Negan is. And this is a huge difference from the TV show, because in the TV show, it was a great big, huge, long, drawn out part of the second half, really, of the season to reveal who it was that Negan is, who, his acts behind the scenes and so on and so forth. In the comics, it's not that way. The reason why is because once these forces immediately demand, what it is that Rick Grimes has, the forces of his group open fire, and they immediately start taking out, all these various people. They start slaughtering them left and right. And so while they do go into retreat, all this does is make things worse. And so when they head back, when they get back to the Alexandria safe safe zone, the question is, what should they do? I mean, they have all these supplies, they have all these things that they need, but they also know that a conflict is looming on the horizon. Now, this also is Robert Kirkman setting the stage for the death of a major character in the sense that we see a lot of them coming together. We see, of course, Maggie revealing to Glenn that she's pregnant. We have Rick Grimes sort of speaking to the entire, congregation or the entire group as a whole, telling them that with the Hilltop Colony, with, because of the fact that, things seem to be getting darker, that times are going to be getting harder. It also shows us, that Rick Grimes and Andrea are starting to get into more of a relationship, that the two of them have their own issues in terms of trust. They have their own issues in terms of how it is they're working together. But at the same time, the idea is they're going to become something more serious. Now, again, picking up and continuing on, we know that that Abraham and Eugene essentially join forces, or I guess they come together for a recon mission at the request of Rick Grimes. But in the midst of this, Abraham is suddenly shot through the head with an arrow. Now, this takes Eugene completely by surprise, but remember, in the comic books, much like the TV show, Eugene is basically a coward. There are a couple instances when he stands up and he suddenly has skills or he develops a backbone, but 90% of the time, he's very weak. Now, the arrival of the forces of Negan really don't tell us exactly what it is that's going on with Eugene, but what we do know is that almost immediately after he's captured, he's taken before the Alexandria safe zone. And immediately, the forces of Negan start opening fire in terms of, issuing warning shots and letting people know that they're there. Now, Eugene is able to make his escape by biting the crotch of one of Negan's guys, which is kind of weird, but it's him making his escape. Rick Grimes also comes to the rescue, and then we have Andrea taking pot shots with a sniper rifle. So again, they're basically killing off the forces of Negan every single time they get into an encounter, and it sends the forces of Negan running for the hills. And again, this is basically just a scenario where things keep going from bad to worse for Rick Grimes. And this is something that I hope you take note of here, because in this situation, Rick Grimes is showing himself to be fearless. He is worried a little bit in terms of what happens next. When these guys take off and they say, Negan is going to kill you, Negan's going to kill all of you, it does raise some questions of what comes next, what happens next. But Rick Grimes does not seem to be extremely concerned here. Instead, he seems to be kind of blowing things off and not really worrying about it. And so what this does is it sort of segues into various members of the camp kind of concerned about the direction things are taking, sort of worried about the direction things are taking. We see Eugene and Rosita dealing with the death of Abraham, which was actually pretty sudden. It was a real shocker. There's of course a meeting with everybody in terms of the church and people talking about the passing of a couple members of their group. And so it's basically just sort of an in-between, kind of a lull period with everybody coming to an understanding of what it is that's going on and the direction that everything is taken. And so what we do here is we pick up with Andrea, we pick up with Rick Grimes, we pick up with Spencer and Michonne as they start to make their way to the Hilltop Colony. But the problem with this is the last time they went to the Hilltop Colony, they were being led by Paul Monroe. They were being led by Jesus. This time they're not. And so they kind of have to make their way there by themselves. And because of this, we're actually going to see them struggling a little bit. But in addition to seeing this happen, with Rick Grimes effectively being the leader, some of the saviors are sitting on a rooftop, and as soon as their van passes by and leaves, one of the guys tells them to alert Negan, let Negan know that these guys are on their way. And so what we do is we pick up with Rick and Michonne and everybody else, or I guess Carl and Glenn and Maggie, as they end up having to camp out for the night, simply because they're not really lost so much as they're still trying to find their way. And it's much easier to travel in the daytime than it is at night because you can't really see that far ahead of you. And so when they take camp, they basically start going through setting up basically like a watch. Each of them takes turns keeping an eye on what's going on. But when it's Rick Grimes' turn to keep an eye out, he's suddenly taken by surprise. He's suddenly taken from behind. Now, there's something else that I want to point out here that I actually really didn't think about mentioning until now, is that Rick Grimes is down a hand. Now, this doesn't require a great big huge amount of exposition. Rick Grimes had his hand cut off by the governor, during the whole Woodbury situation. It's an interesting dichotomy to see that Rick Grimes does not have his hand in the comics, but he does have it in the TV show. It's not the most significant thing. In fact, there was a big story arc dealing with Rick Grimes when he lost his hand, but that has long since passed, and he's basically learned how to cope with it. But I thought it was just something worth mentioning as we were going through this video. But the fact remains that when Rick Grimes is taken from behind, when he's taken by surprise, he's brought down, and he's faced with around 50 members of the Saviors. Now again, the Saviors are usually around 200 strong, so they have a great big huge camp. They have a huge setup that we'll actually see in the future. But the basis behind this is Negan makes his appearance for the very first time. And what I want to tell you guys right now is we've only seen a glimpse of Negan in the TV show. But if you got the feeling that Negan was cold-blooded and ruthless, you are 100% right. Negan puts the governor to shame in terms of how dark he is and in terms of how cruel he is. His cruelty isn't necessarily in being overt, like he doesn't really torture people, at least in this situation. He doesn't torture them, he doesn't really mutilate them, I mean, he kills them in brutal ways. His gruesomeness and his darkness is in the sense that he thinks it's funny, that he thinks it's hilarious, that he's killing people. Now, what we see with Negan's original arrival is almost identical to what we saw in the TV show, and that's one of the things that I love so much. There were a couple changes in terms of phrase. Of course, in the TV show, Negan started talking about the New World Order, about how things are, you know, and how everything works. And in the comics, he does almost the exact same thing. You know, what he says is that he wants half of everything that Rick Grimes has, and that if half is too much, then they can steal, or they can find, or they can do whatever it is they need to do, make more in order to offset, and it'll cover the difference. It's almost word for word with what Negan said in the comic books versus the TV show. But what this does is this also introduces the character of Lucille. Now, when I say the character of Lucille, I use that phrase loosely, and the reason why is because Negan talks about Lucille as if it were a person. Of course, Lucille is the baseball bat, but one of Negan's signature phrases, and one of the phrases that I love so much that I imagine some of you are probably saying right now as you're watching this video, is Lucille is thirsty. Lucille is thirsty is a catchphrase of Negan in The Walking Dead, and there are people that still say it. Lucille is a barbed wire baseball bat, and she's thirsty because she loves drinking blood. That is to say, she loves being covered in the blood of people that Negan kills, and he has killed a lot of people. One of the other reasons why I say Negan is so dark here is because, again, tying into this humor, tying into this element of him that doesn't really seem to care about what it is that he does to other people, the fact that he's a psychopath, sociopath, you know, all different kinds of paths, that ultimately he decides that he doesn't want to kill Glenn, and he doesn't want to kill Michonne, and he doesn't want to kill some of the other members of the group because it'll make him seem racist because they're minorities. And so the initial idea here from us is that he's going to kill Rick Grimes, or he's going to kill one of the kids, maybe he'll kill Carl. But ultimately, as he starts going through and he does the whole eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing, he chooses Glenn. And Glenn ends up being the person that he kills. And he does it in, I would say, spectacular fashion, but also in very gruesome fashion. Of course, he says, you know, you can breathe, you can blink, you know, you can cry, you know, you're all gonna be doing that. And this is why I love the first appearance of Negan, because in the TV show, it was word for word. It was almost word for word. It was all, you know, it was like Jeffrey Dean Morgan literally just read off the comic everything that Negan said when he first appeared in the comics. And while Glenn initially begs not to die, Negan totally ignores him and starts smashing him in the head. And this is why I say he's so sadistic, because he starts making jokes about how Glenn's taking it like a champ. You know, when he starts saying, hey, are you okay? Are you still in there? You know, when he starts making jokes about how Glenn's, one of his eyes is halfway popping out of his head, about how gross it is. Now, keep in mind, the reason why this was such a big deal when this first happened is because when it was Glenn, he had been a mainstay character of the comics for so long, and none of us ever really envisioned a scenario where Glenn would die like this, especially when you consider the fact that it's, you know, in the Walking Dead comics, anybody can die at any time. It really tells you how much we loved Glenn as a character. But not only that, Glenn is a soon-to-be father. Maggie was pregnant. You know, Maggie is pregnant with his children. And so, you know, we expected him to continue on. We expected him to live and even, you know, maybe just see the birth of his kids, but he doesn't get that. Instead, Negan just starts smashing his brains into the ground. And so what Negan says, and this is one of the reasons why I say that the fall of Negan is almost as spectacular as his introduction, due to the fact that Rick Grimes mutters to himself that he's going to kill Negan. And Negan says, okay, fine, if you think you can kill me, then do it right now. Now, there's a reason why Rick Grimes didn't do this. Rick Grimes could have killed Negan. He could have killed him on the spot, and he could have called it a day. But Negan calls his bluff. And what Negan says is, if you kill me, then my saviors are gonna kill you, and they're gonna wipe out Alexandria. And that's exactly what would happen. And you know, Rick Grimes knows this would happen. Rick Grimes knows that if he were to kill Negan right here and right now, yes, the saviors might be leaderless for a while, but someone would rise up and take Negan's place. Not only that, with Rick Grimes and his entire crew being killed, no one from the Hilltop Colony or the Alexandria Alexandria safe zone know what's going on out here. Andrea knows that Rick Grimes went out on a mission, and she would most likely panic if he's not back in a certain amount of time. But she doesn't know that he's encountering Negan. She doesn't know that Glenn's been killed. She has no idea any of that's happening. And so basically, if Rick Grimes were to kill Negan, the forces of the Saviors would cut a swath through the Hilltop Colony and the Alexandria safe zone, killing pretty much all of them and taking all those supplies for their own. And so it's in the best interest of everybody else, not really even Rick Grimes, but it's in the best interest of everybody else for Rick Grimes to hold his tongue and to let Negan say what he wants to say, and then, you know, survive the day and plan accordingly. And that's exactly what happens. The group begins the process of going through and planning out how to kill Negan. But with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think about all this, because again, you know, this is a really cool, you know, line of stories. I mean, you know, the whole Something to Fear story arc is incredible in and of itself, simply because of the fact that, you know, once Glenn dies, Maggie starts freaking out. She attacks Rick Grimes. You know, you might as well have killed him yourself. You know, why did you let Glenn die like that? You know, why couldn't you do something? Everybody is freaking out, but more so than that, they're also feeding on their anger. They're also outraged at the fact that they've been made to watch one of their closest friends killed, you know, on the concrete ground of a parking lot, you know, in the most dishonorable way possible. And so it basically sets the stage for this future idea that the life of Negan is going to come crashing down around him, and the forces of Rick Grimes and his team seem to be the ones that are going to do it. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, if you guys are new here to my channel, make sure you guys hit the sub button if you want to see more Walking Dead content on my channel. Also, make sure you drop a like and post a comment down below. Tell me, you know, tell me whether or not you guys want to see more Walking Dead stuff. Tell me what you think about Negan. I'm really curious. You know, how do you guys feel about him as a character? Because I got to tell you, I am so hyped for the new season of The Walking Dead. And I think, and I'm calling it now, I think this season premiere is going to be the most watched episode, the most watched season premiere of a TV show in the history of television. I know it's a bold statement. Don't worry, that fact does not go missed by me. I know it is a bold statement, but I think it's going to be the case, because The Walking Dead is the most watched television show on network television, not taking into account paid channels like HBO. That belongs to Game of Thrones. But because of this, I think, you know, people want to know who it was that Negan killed. I think it's going to be one of the most popular season premieres of all time. But anyway, yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap this video up, because I could ramble on about The Walking Dead forever. And yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.